At a recent event in Las Vegas, Martin O'Malley went after Bernie Sanders by trying to tie him to former CNN host Lou Dobbs and painting him as anti-immigrant. Really interesting. Here we go. Now, Martin O'Malley actually, in doing this, brought up a vote and an interview from 2007 on the issue of immigration, specifically H-1B visas. Now, those for people who are not familiar with what an H-1B visa is, it's a temporary non-immigrant employment visa for, quote, highly educated foreign professionals in specialty occupations that require at least a bachelor's degree or the equivalent, right? Now, what O'Malley had said is saying, quote, when comprehensive immigration reform was up for a vote in 2007, Senator Sanders went on Lou Dobbs' show, "Are you familiar with Lou Dobbs?" and said that immigrants take our jobs and depress our wages. Not only are those statements flat out wrong, they actually harm the consensus. But that's not what he said. The way that he says, O'Malley puts that, makes it sound incredibly terrible. But I actually have the recording from that interview. But first, O'Malley is actually trying to call Senator Sanders anti-immigrant. That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, what's this interview about before I show the clip? Well, back in 2007, Senator Sanders actually opposed a Bush-era immigration reform package. Now, why did he vote against that? Well, it actually had a provision that would raise the cap on temporary worker visas. In this 2007 interview with Dobbs, Sanders actually called those provisions the second front in outsourcing. So let's show you some of the video from that 2007 interview.
Next week, the full Senate resumes debate on amnesty. Many senators oppose the legislation. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont says that bill should be defeated outright.
I hope very much that in its present form it does not survive. I think it needs a lot more work on it, especially looking at the economic implications of these guest worker programs.
Is there any sense amongst your colleagues in the Senate, there in Washington, that it is time for people to begin to represent their constituents rather than these special interests, corporate interests?
But you got it, and that's exactly the situation, and of course there is concern on at least some of our parts. The reality is that I think a growing number of Americans understand is that what happens in Congress is to a very significant degree dictated by big money interests. And these guys are based, their whole ideology is based on greed. They are selling out American workers, and in fact they're selling out our entire country. And that is a major struggle that we have got to engage in to take back our country from these very powerful and wealthy special interests.
These special interests, and you and I have talked about this, it is now so blatant, so overt, that only those who would refuse to see could deny that both the Democratic and Republican parties are owned lock, stock, and barrel by corporate America and special interests, including in the amnesty legislation, socio-ethnic-centric interest groups, who really have very little regard for the traditions of this country, the values of this country, or the constituents. It is seemingly impossible to awaken our elected officials in Washington to their moral responsibility. There are wonderful people, including yourself. I don't mean to suggest that everyone is in this situation. Only the majority, unfortunately, in the Senate and the House. Is there any hope that we can change that?
Of course there is hope that we can change it. And I think there are a growing number of Americans who understand that there's something wrong when the middle class in this country continues to shrink despite a huge increase in worker productivity. Poverty continues to increase. Since Bush has been president, 5 million more Americans have slipped into poverty. 6 million Americans more have lost their health insurance, and the gap between the rich and everybody else is growing wider. So when President Bush tells you how great the economy is doing, what he is really saying is that the CEOs of large multinationals are doing very, very well. He's kind of ignoring the economic reality of everybody else. And that gets us to the immigration issue. If poverty is increasing and if wages are going down, I don't know why we need millions of people to be coming into this country as guest workers who will work for lower wages than American workers and drive wages down even lower than they are right now.
So before I get into Sanders and why I agree with Bernie's overall point, I just want to mention that Lou Dobbs, kind of an asshole, where he said socio-ethnic interests who really have very little regard for the traditions of this country and values of this country or the constituents, saying that that's one of the people driving the immigration debate. And on that point, I really wish Sanders had kind of pushed back on that, especially against that anti-immigrant kind of bullshit line, right? But that said, let's go into some policy specifics and why I actually agree with Senator Sanders overall. Now, back in 2013, Mother Jones had referenced a report about how H-1 visas, the guest worker program, are actually being abused, not by the immigrants themselves, but by corporations. Computer World, and this is from the report, revealed last week that the top 10 users of H-1B visas last year were all offshore outsourcing firms, such as the firms of Tata and Infosys. Together, these firms hired nearly half of all H-1B workers, and less than 3% of them applied to become permanent residents. The H-1B worker learns the job and then rotates back to the home country and takes the work with him, explains Ron Hira, an immigration expert who teaches at the Rochester Institute of Technology. None other than India's former Commerce Secretary once dubbed the H-1B the, quote, outsourcing visa. That's pretty clear there, right? Now, proponents of more H-1B visas say that companies are doing it. Oh, it's a last resort. We can't find enough qualified American candidates. So what can we do? We have to bring more in, right? Got to bring more people from overseas. But according to the Economic Policy Institute, as of 2013, tech employment rates actually hadn't rebounded to pre-recession levels, meaning that there were more people that were unemployed who could have had jobs in the tech industry, who were perfectly qualified to have these jobs, but they weren't employed. While H-1B visas, remember back in 2007, they wanted to increase the level of H-1B visas. And this was before the recession. And then it got worse. And more people in the tech industry were unemployed here in America, and yet they wanted to reach overseas and grab more guest workers. That doesn't sound like, to me, that they didn't have enough qualified Americans. It sounded like they wanted to save some fucking money and not pay Americans what they should be paying for having these skills. Now, and from 2001 to 2011, there's more from the EPI. The mean hourly wage for computer programmers didn't increase enough to beat inflation. Now let's add on to that. There were at least two high-profile cases of employers abusing the system of H-1B visas to actually pad their bottom lines. In 2013, Tata paid $30 million to settle a wage theft dispute involving 13,000 foreign workers, and Infosys paid a record of $34 million to settle a visa fraud case after it committed, quote, systemic visa fraud and abuse of immigration processes, according to court documents. And in a lot of these cases, American workers, they get laid off after having to train the replacements who were brought in on these guest worker visas. I think it's pretty obvious why Senator Sanders would actually vote against this in 2007, because this would expand the program. That said, you can't paint Senator Sanders as anti-immigrant. It's ridiculous. In 2013, Sanders supported the 2013 immigration bill. Now, what would this do? What made it different than the 2007 bill? I'm glad you asked. This bill would have made reforms to the H-1B program. Now, according to the Brookings Institute, the 2013 bill would have raised wages for H-1B workers, required employers to make an effort to hire American workers first by posting job openings publicly, That's something that they weren't required to do. And would have prevented abuse of H-1B program by increasing fees for employers who are heavily dependent on foreign guest workers. It also would have banned companies from employing more than 75% of their workers on an H-1B or L-1 visa in 2014, decreasing to 65% in 2015 and 50% in 2016. The 2007 bill that Senator Sanders voted against didn't have any of those provisions. It would have raised the cap on how many people you could bring in with the guest program, and it also would have decreased the amount of time a guest worker could stay in the country. So you could make an argument that the 2007 immigration bill wasn't progressive enough. And that's exactly what Senator Sanders was saying. No, it needs a lot of work, especially with the guest worker program. It needs a lot of work. They worked on that, and in 2013, he voted for it. Once again, you can't really say that Senator Sanders is anti-immigrant, especially considering he's the son of a Polish immigrant. Now, this bill in 2007, you got to admit that it would have been better than nothing, right? But it still wouldn't have protected American workers. And Bernie Sanders, he's all about protecting American workers, and he's been very consistent about that. So as I said, it makes sense that he voted against this bill. Now, I'm in favor, personally, of a pathway to citizenship, right? I'm in favor of immigration. I'm even for the original purpose of the H-1Bs, right? To bring in talent for other countries that we might not have here. That said, it's become a way for corporate America to actually fuck over workers to pad their bottom lines, and I'm totally against that. It's being abused. And Sanders was right to vote against a program that would have let this exploitation get even worse. Now on to O'Malley. To use that vote, without all the nuance, without all the facts, to use that vote as a smear against Bernie Sanders, to call him anti-immigrant, and worse, tie him to an asshole like Lou Dobbs, is why O'Malley is sitting at 5% in the polls. Shit like this is dishonest, it's negative, and it's an example of the kind of politicking that Americans are frankly sick and tired of.